Hi, I'm Jack. Welcome to the lesson of Christ and the Sabbath. Let's begin in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 12, verse 1. At that time, Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were an hungered and began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. A seemingly innocent exercise, quite harmless, quite normal, natural. They were hungry, the corn was there to meet their need. They plucked and began to eat, but it was on the Sabbath day, and the Pharisees were watching. Verse 2. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto him, Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day. The law that dealt with the Sabbath day was introduced to the children of Israel about 1.5 months after they were delivered out of Egypt. It was in response to their unbelief. They murmured. Exodus chapter 16, verse 2. And the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. Verse 3. And the children of Israel said unto them, Would to God we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, and when we did eat bread to the full. For you have brought us forth into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. How terrible were their thoughts, how evil, how deep their unbelief. As if God had delivered them just to kill them. They would rather die as slaves in a strange land with a lot of food than to be free. This was the Lord's response to them in verse 4. Then said the Lord unto Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove whether they will walk in my law or no. Through the gathering of bread, the Lord would see if they would walk in his law. Verse 5. And it shall come to pass that on the 6th day they shall prepare that which they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. Twice the amount of bread to be collected on the 6th day. Let's move on down to verse 22. And it came to pass that on the 6th day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for one man. And all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. Verse 23. And he said unto them, This is that which the Lord hath said. Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto the Lord. Bake that which you will bake today. Seed that you will seed, and that which remaineth over lay up for you to be kept until the morning. Twice as much bread on the 6th day. It was to be prepared, it was to be cooked on the 6th day, it was to be kept for the next day. Verse 24, and they laid it up till the morning as Moses bade, and it did not stink, neither was there any worm therein. Therein is a miracle in itself. When they collected too much bread on the other days, it would deteriorate and the worms would be there. But the bread collected on the 6th day was not affected. Verse 25, and Moses said, Eat that today, for today is a Sabbath unto the Lord. Today you shall not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, which is a Sabbath, in it there shall be none. The Sabbath law, gathering of food for 6 days. No gathering on the 7th day. No bread was going to fall anyway. Verse 27, And it came to pass that there went out some of the people on the seventh day for to gather, and they found none. Verse 28, and the Lord said unto Moses, how long refuse you to keep my commandments and my laws? Verse 29, see, for that the Lord hath given you the Sabbath, therefore he giveth you on the sixth day the bread of 2 days. Abide ye every man in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the seventh day. So the people rested on the seventh day. There's the law of the Sabbath. Everything that was to be done on the 6 days. On the seventh day, nothing was to be done. No cooking, no gathering, no moving. Every man was to remain in his tent. Let no man go out of his place on the seventh day. This was the law of the Sabbath. It was placed as the fourth commandment with the other 9 to make up the 10 commandments. Let's read that. Exodus chapter 20, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. Verse 10, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. Nobody to work, no animal to work. Even the stranger was to restrain from work. This is the Sabbath law. No work in order to keep the day holy. And this was the law the Pharisees were wielding against the disciples of Jesus. Let's go back to Matthew chapter 12, verse 3. And this is what Jesus said to them. But he said unto them, have you not read what David did when he was an hungered, and they that were with him? He referred to the scriptures that spoke of what David did when he was hungry. Verse 4, how he entered into the house of God and did eat the shewbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them which were with him, but only for the priest. The story of David. He used the experience and the account of David to justify the actions of the disciples. What David did was unlawful. He took bread that was only for the priest, but he was hungry, and he took it and met the needs of his men and he. He seemed wrong, unlawful, but right, according to Jesus. If David could do that, why should not the disciples do the same? Then in verse 5, Jesus continued, or have you not read in the law how that on the Sabbath days the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? They desecrate the Sabbath. They broke the Sabbath law. They worked, yet they were blameless because they worked in the temple. They were exempt from keeping the Sabbath law. Verse 6, but I say unto you that in this place is one greater than the temple. The priests were exempt from keeping the Sabbath law because they worked in the temple. But here is one who is greater than the temple, the Lord of the temple, Jesus Christ himself. Should not the disciples be more blameless of breaking the law of the Sabbath? Then in verse 7, Jesus said, "But if you had known what this means, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless." He was referring to Hosea chapter 6, verse 6. "For I desired mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings." If only the Pharisees had known the will of God, if only they had known the desire that at the heart of God is love, and in love there is mercy. If they had only known that, they would not have condemned the guiltless. Then in verse 8, "For the Son of Man is Lord even on the Sabbath day." Greater than the temple, greater than the Sabbath day, the Lord holds the supreme authority. Mercy must prevail. He is the new covenant. His blood is the blood of the new covenant. By grace are we saved through faith. And here in the new covenant is forgiveness. Let's be reminded of that again in Jeremiah 31, verse 33 and 34. "But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts, and will be their God, they shall be my people." Verse 34, "And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them, saith the Lord, for I will forgive their iniquities, I will remember their sins no more." Knowledge. This is what God desires for us, to know Him, to love as He loves. Soon after that, Jesus went into the temple, and again He came into contact with the Pharisees. Verse 9, Matthew chapter 12. "And when He was departed, He went into their synagogue." Verse 10, "And behold, there was a man which had his hand withered, and they asked Him, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath days?" That they might accuse Him. The question was to give them a reason so that they could accuse Him, condemn Him, and eventually destroy Him. Verse 11, "And He said unto them, What man shall there be among you that shall have one sheep, and if it fall into a pit on the Sabbath day, will he not lay hold on it and lift it out?" Jesus knew them. He knew their hearts. He knew their hypocrisy. That they who strived to keep the law and to show themselves righteous to the law would not hesitate to break it if one of their sheep should fall in a pit. Verse 12, Jesus said, "How much then is a man better than a sheep? If you can do that for a sheep, surely you can do it for a man. Wherefore it is lawful to do well on the Sabbath days." It is lawful according to the law of the new covenant. It is lawful according to the law of Christ. It is lawful according to mercy, which is what God desires. Then in verse 13, "Then said He to the man, Stretch forth thine hand." He spoke the word, words of life, words of power, words of healing, and He stretched it forth. and it was restored whole like as the other. Were the Pharisees amazed? Were they impressed? Did it convince them that surely this must be a man of God? Sadly, no. Verse 14, the Pharisees went out and held a council against him, how they might destroy him. Let's move to another account of Jesus in John. In chapter 5. The incident takes place by a pool of Bethesda. The infirm, the blind, the halt, the crippled, they had come down to the pool because it was known that when the waters were troubled by an angel, the first one in would be healed completely. And by this pool was a man. Let's read about him in verse 5. And a certain man was there which had an infirmity 38 years. Verse 6, when Jesus saw him lie and knew that he had been now a long time in that case, he said unto him, wilt thou be made whole? Words to stir up hope, words to stir up faith, faith in Jesus. Verse 7, the impotent man answered him, Sir, I have no man, when the water is troubled, to put me into the pool. But while I'm coming, another steppeth down before me. He just can't make it quick enough. Before he gets to the pool, someone's gone in. He's missed again. Verse 8. Jesus said unto him, rise, take up thy bed, and walk. Words, powerful words, words of life, words of healing. All he did was speak. Immediately the man was made whole, took up his bed and walked. And on the same day was the Sabbath. Verse 10. The Jews therefore said unto him that was cured, it is the Sabbath day. It is not lawful for thee to carry thy bed. The man's defense was, the one who healed me told me to do it. He said, take up your bed and walk. Verse 11. Then asked they him, what man is this which said unto thee, take up thy bed and walk? Verse 13. And he that was healed wist not who it was, for Jesus had conveyed himself away, a multitude being in that place. Verse 14. Afterward Jesus findeth him in the temple and said unto him, behold, thou art made whole. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come unto thee. Live by faith. What is not of faith is sin. Verse 15. The man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus which had made him whole. Verse 16. And therefore did the Jews persecute Jesus, and sought to slay him, because he had done these things on the Sabbath day. The breaking of the law of the Sabbath, the penalty for breaking the law of the Sabbath, was the death penalty. When the law was given to the children of Israel, the penalty was given. The penalty was death. Exodus 31. Verse 15. 6 days may work be done, but in the seventh is the Sabbath of rest, holy to the Lord. Whosoever doeth any work in the Sabbath day, he shall be surely put to death. Verse 17, back in the Gospel of John. But Jesus answered them, my Father worketh hitherto, and I work. You can't stop God from working. You can't stop Jesus from working. He's not going to keep the Sabbath law. The Sabbath law wasn't made for him. It wasn't made for his Father. They're working. They're working every day. My Father worketh hitherto, and I work. Verse 18. Therefore the Jews sought the more to kill him, because he had not only had broken the Sabbath, but said also that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. The Jews didn't understand, the Pharisees didn't understand that the law was not made for the Father, for the Son. It was not made for the man who was healed by Jesus. It was not made for those who live by faith. It was not made for the disciples. It was only made with the children of Israel. The children of Israel, those who were alive that day. Let's just read about that in Deuteronomy very quickly. Chapter 5. Verse 2. The Lord our God made a covenant with us in Horeb. Verse 3. The Lord made not this covenant with our fathers, but with us, even us who are all of us here alive this day. Verse 4. The Lord talked with you face to face in the mount under the midst of the fire. Verse 5. I stood between the Lord and you at that time to show you the word of the Lord. For you were afraid by reason of the fire, and went not up into the mount, saying, and right up to verse 22, the 10 commandments. Notice that. Moses told the children of Israel, the Lord did not make this covenant with our fathers, the old covenant, the words of the covenant, the 10 commandments. He didn't make it with their fathers, their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It was only made with them who were alive that day. It was introduced 1.5 months after they came out of Egypt. It was a response to their murmuring, their unbelief, their hunger. It was not made for a righteous man. Look at 1 Timothy chapter 1. 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 8. But we know that the law is good if a man use it lawfully. It's good. It was given by the Lord. But it must be used properly. It must be applied to the right people. It was not made with the ancestors of Israel. It was made for them to meet their situation and their spiritual condition. Verse 9, 1 Timothy, knowing this, that the law is not made for a righteous man, but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly and for sinners, for unholy and profane, for murderers of fathers and murderers of mothers, for manslayers. Verse 10, for whoremongers, for them that defile themselves with mankind, for man-stealers, for liars, for perjured persons, and if there be any other thing that is contrary to sound doctrine. Verse 11, according to the glorious gospel of the blessed God, which is committed to my trust. And finally, Galatians chapter 3, verse 19, Paul wrote it in this way, wherefore then serveth the law? It was added because of transgressions. It came in as a result of unbelief, of sins. It was added. It wasn't there before, it was added. till the seed should come, till Jesus should come, the new covenant, the mediator of the new covenant, to whom the promise was made, and it was ordained by angels in the hand of a mediator. Thank you. Trust that this study has been insightful for you.